Morning, everyone. Welcome. Glad to have you here this morning. How's everyone doing? I'm trying to see who's in the room. A lot of our regulars I see on so many of these calls and some new folks as well. I know we've got a great group of folks that were in the Facing Race Together series with Heather Hackman. I know many of you are interested in what we're going to talk about today. So welcome back to those friends and colleagues in that cohort. We'll get started in just a minute as people are entering. I feel like we should be playing some music or something as we're sitting here waiting. I know I've done that on some calls where we've actually had some music, just letting people sort of chill as they get into the room.
I'd offer to sing, but people would probably start leaving if I did that.
I know if I sang, we would have a small audience. So yeah, I agree with that. Let's see what time we're on top of the hour, and I think I will just go ahead and get started. I like to try to start on time, even though people sometimes join us a little bit late. I want to welcome everybody. This is Debbie Nelson with Together SC, and I am joining you this morning from literally Greenville. It doesn't look like it if you look at my screen. I'm also a big fan of the South Carolina coast, and that's my happy place. So I hope all of you are in your happy place today as you join us. We are just delighted this morning to do what we're calling a philanthropic partner spotlight. As all of you know, in the nonprofit sector, we do have some wonderful philanthropic partners across South Carolina that are helping to support the work that we do. And we periodically like to offer these types of programming sessions to let you know what these partners are doing. So one of our good friends, we've become a really strong ally, I think, over the last year, is Unum Colonial Life. Some of you may have had the good fortune to join us last August, where we first introduced a brand new social justice fund that they had created in response to much of what was going on in our country. And I think that we'll hear a little more about that, but it was introduced last summer. Many of you attended. I hope many of you have started to build a relationship with Unum around this issue. But here, not quite a year later, they are back, and I'll introduce Alana Stroker in a moment, but they're back to tell us some lessons learned through this process, some of the successes, some of the things that they are doing around this fund where there's still funding available. And they've also offered, and we have some nonprofit grant recipients who received some of the early recipients of the social justice money that we're going to hear from, to show us and for us to hear about how accessible this company is to hearing from you and partnering with you and really sharing with you the work that they are supporting. So what a great opportunity for all of those that are here today to learn about Unum Colonial Life. We're fortunate again to have Alana Stroker with us. She is their social corporate responsibility program manager. And she's been doing this type of work with the company, I guess, for over 3 years now, Alana, but really her roots really are in the nonprofit sector. She's very committed to community work and has done a lot in the sector to support them, I think, on the nonprofit side, but now is fortunate to be on the other side and helping support through funding through her company. So I'm delighted to have them back. I'm delighted to hear updates on what happened with this fund and where they're going with the fund. And I'm really delighted that we're going to be able to hear from Roots and Rebound, a nonprofit, as well as Columbia College, who also received some of their funding. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Alana, and welcome to everybody.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and appreciate the opportunity to join you all once again. When Madeline and I were speaking, I guess it's been about a month and a half ago, and we talked about maybe doing a follow-up to what we presented to you all last August. We felt like it might be great for me to talk through lessons learned about our social justice fund, how the fund has expanded, which I'm going to talk about a little later, how it's structured, and some of the great programs that we've been honored enough to be a part of and be able to fund in different ways. And then at the end of the conversation today, I'm going to talk through briefly our other grant making programs that may have alignment with some of the work that you all are doing in the community, and then talk through the best way for you to submit possible applications for those grant programs as well. So let's dive right on in and talk about lessons learned with the Social Justice Fund. And where we are in terms of money that's been invested. So what you see on your screen now is really the same slide that I shared last year. And I'm not going to read it to you, but I do want to touch on the high points, just in case there's some people here that may not remember what we talked about last year, or maybe weren't in attendance and need some context surrounding the intention behind the Social Justice Fund, and what our company's focus and purpose is with creating it. So we launched it in July of last year. It was new work for us in many ways. In other ways, it wasn't. There were some programs that we were funding under our standard charitable giving program that touched on this work, but it was never really called out and highlighted as its own program. And so in light of everything that happened over last summer, we felt like as a company, a verbal commitment to change, a written commitment to change is so important. We did that too, but our leadership and our team really wanted to put a program in place that would really put our money where our mouth is and say, not only are we committing to change, but we want to start actively researching and finding organizations that are the boots on the ground that are committed to creating this change. So our company seeded the fund with $500,000, and then we also invited our employees to contribute as well. And then the structure of how the decisions are made with the Social Justice Fund, it's also unique to our company. It's not a typical way that we make grant decisions. And so I'd love to give an update there with how that's structured and what we've seen and how that's changed. So what we did is we formed an advisory committee made up of our employees. And within our company, we have 5 employee resource groups. We have race and ethnicity, LGBTQ, individuals with disabilities, a women's professional network, and a veterans group. And so what we did is we took one individual from each one of those employee resource groups to serve on our advisory committee. Those employees were not chosen by level within the company. Some of the people on our advisory committee are entry-level employees that work in our contact center. They were chosen because of their commitment to inclusion and diversity, and their commitment to giving back and being active in their community. So they're the decision makers for the fund, and I act as their guide. So when you submit an application, ideally, what works great for our company is I've met with you before you submit your application so that you kind of know what we're looking for, and we can determine together on the phone if there's alignment between our focus areas and the work that you're doing in the community. And then from there, after you submit your application, I present that application to the advisory committee. Typically, I'm able to answer most of their questions, but if for some reason I can't, I may come back to an organization with a follow-up question. What's been really neat about that structure is these individuals are looking at a grant application through a lens that's very different than mine. They may have grown up differently. They may have come from a different culture than I did. And they think about questions in a different way than maybe everybody else. So it's given me a great perspective on the applications that come in. And I really think it's gone so well. As far as lessons learned, I think initially, just the cadence that we met had to change because we did get a lot of applications, and that's a great problem to have. We're not complaining about that at all, but it didn't really work for us to try to get through more than 3 applications at a time in an advisory committee meeting because we really wanted those employees that were part of our advisory committee to feel like they were in a safe space where they could talk through the application at length if they needed to and not feel rushed. So that's one thing we had to change. We had to increase our cadence to meet really monthly as opposed to bi-monthly. And in some situations, we've had to meet more than once a month. And that's gone really well. And I think having the flexibility to do that and to know, you know, we're new to this. This is a new way of doing this. And of course, we're going to have to change things as we move through this process has been great. And beginning in 2021, we increased the cadence of meeting, and that's really helped. So some of you on the call, if you submitted an application, you may have felt towards the end of last year that it was maybe taking us a really long time to make a decision. And that was simply because we realized pretty quickly we needed to meet more frequently. And then of course, coordination of calendars was a challenge. I think we've navigated that challenge pretty well. And now we've got a good rhythm going on. What you see on your screen too will show you our focus area. Our focus for 2020 was very narrow: racial justice applications and racial justice applications only. And that went really well. I was so excited and blown away to see all of the different applications that came in from organizations doing this work in our community that I didn't even know about. So that's gone great. I will talk a little bit in a little while about how we're expanding those perimeters. But for 2020, that narrow focus, it really worked out well. And then from there, I thought it might be interesting, of course, to show you again our focus areas in case you aren't aware of what our focus areas are for the Social Justice Fund. So systemic and policy change, training, economic justice, and civic engagement. As long as a program fits within one of those different focus areas, they'd be eligible for applying for the Social Justice Fund. Some organizations check more than one of those boxes. That's great, but that's definitely, not a requirement. And then from there, I wanted to show a breakdown to all of you about really where that funding has ended up within those 4 focus areas. I'm a data person, so I find that really interesting anyway. And I have one specific call out here that I find really interesting. So when we first launched the fund in July, the vast majority of our applications were training based, training and education focused, to the point that as we ended 2020, I began to get a little concerned because I really wanted to see applications come in, of course, that checked some of those other focus areas, because training is fantastic, but there's so much more to our social justice fund than just training. And so we really actively looked for organizations that were working within those other focus areas. And then it really wasn't until this most recent round of funding that you see systemic and policy change kind of jumped ahead of training in the amount funded. So training and education is at 23% of the amount that you see that we've invested. And really within the past month or two, systemic and policy change kind of surpassed that with 32% in funding. And I think that's great. And I was so happy to see that kind of round out. And so the $263,849 that you see that we've invested, that encompasses our grants. But what's also really cool about that is it includes our employee donations as well. So I think it shows the commitment that our employees have to the fund. And it shows how active they were with it. Not only did they donate to our internal social justice fund, but another interesting trend that we noticed is the majority of them found organizations on their own in their community that they wanted to direct their money to. So they donated to those organizations directly. And our company has a matching gifts program, which they've definitely taken advantage of. And we were so happy to see that. So if an employee within our company has an organization that they're very passionate about in some way, they're welcome and actually encouraged to donate to those organizations. They don't have to feel really boxed in and only able to donate to our internal social justice fund. And I think that's been a great benefit for them. And it's definitely one that they've taken advantage of, which has been great. We've also gotten feedback from employees that the organizations that we've funded, they really feel a lot of ownership in that, which has been wonderful. And I think the reason for that is because we don't just send these organizations a check and then end our relationship. We try to do a lot of follow-up. Sometimes we invite organizations to speak to our employees in different forums so that they can really learn about what our company is investing in and why it's so important. So with that, I'll pause. And what I'm excited to do is turn this over to a community partner of ours who applied for a program really towards third, fourth quarter of last year, I believe. Might have been a little earlier than that, but his program was very unique. It was a planning grant, which is different for our company. It's not something we always typically fund, is a planning grant for a new program that's kind of in the conception period. But this program just fit the criteria of what we wanted to do so well. And the way that the grant was presented to us was just so well done. And what was also interesting about this program that you're about to hear about is our leadership that oversees our social justice fund nationwide really called this program out too, as well as our second community partner that you're going to hear from, as something they haven't seen from any of our other campuses or locations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Mitchell, President Emeritus of Columbia College, to share about his program.
Thank you, and good morning. It's a pleasure to join you this morning, and a special thanks, of course, to Alana and Colonial Life Unum for your support. The murder of George Floyd and the deaths of Breonna Taylor and Rayshard Brooks and Walter Wallace Jr. profoundly impacted our nation and our world. The response was a concerted effort to seek solutions and develop programming that addresses systemic racism, economic inequality, and social justice. At Columbia College, social justice has been a centerpiece since our founding as a women's college in 1854. And as a matter of fact, our mission statement addresses that. Columbia College prepares every student personally and professionally for success through strong liberal arts and professional programs emphasizing service, social justice, and leadership development. I believe it's very important to pursue social justice initiatives. Organizations need to play to their strengths. Columbia College has chose to focus on building resilience through trauma-informed practices. The program, we spent 3 years developing a program, a master's degree in trauma-informed education, and we've incorporated trauma-informed practices in classes in education and in social work. You know, the success of the master's degree, we were approved in June, and by August, we had 50 students enrolled full-time with no advertising, convinced us that we indeed were tapping into something very important, and the trauma-informed practices tip, we needed to take it to the next level. So as the interim president at the time, I chaired a task force to explore how to build on our expertise, and the result was the Institute for Building Resilience Through Trauma-Informed Practices. So we approached Alana and Colonial Life Unum with a request for a planning grant. And Alana, if you could put up our slide that covers this, that would be great.
I'm so sorry, Peter, but I don't have your slide. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. I'll keep talking and refer to it. The proposal emphasized how traumatic experiences in childhood have such long-term implications and ramifications on adults. You know, here are some of the examples. They are 15 times more likely to attempt suicide, those who've had traumatic experiences as youth, 4 times more likely to become an alcoholic, 4 times more likely to inject drugs, 3 times more likely to be absent from work, 4 times more likely to develop sexually transmitted disease, and 3 times more likely to have serious job problems. Most unsettling is the significantly disproportionate impact of trauma on Black, Brown, Asian, Indigenous people, LGBTQIA community, and women. Among the most startling statistics that I found is that a Black woman with a chronological age of 60 has the biological age of 70 because of 400 years of bearing the burden of racism, violence, and stress. So let me walk through essentially the goals of the Institute. First, we played to our strength. We are focusing on academic programs in education and in social work, but also in criminal justice, healthcare, business, and the arts that build resilience through trauma-informed practices. As an undergraduate institution, primarily, we are going to insist that all of our students become exposed to trauma-informed practices and the concepts of building resilience. We'll be offering continuing education programs, seminars, conferences, webinars, blogs that deal with building resilience. And we're going to also publish a quarterly trauma-informed practices quarterly. Columbia College is not Carolina, it's not Clemson. Those are called Research One universities. They focus on deep research. We are a undergraduate primarily institution, and so we're going to focus on practical application. So this journal will include articles from criminal justice or law enforcement, from education, from social work, how they applied trauma-informed practices to improve the lives of those they serve. And then finally, we plan to be an advocate and resource for a focus on building resilience and trauma-informed practices. It's a core strategy, we think, for addressing systemic racism. Working with Alana has been a delight. It's been a joy. She is terrific. She was quickly responsive. I sent her some ideas. She responded right away with some ways in which we could improve it, her guidance, but most of all, the encouragement was outstanding. We really felt like we were a partner with Colonial Life Unum. The results of the planning grant. First, we formed an advisory board, and it's 12 people, experts from all across the country, literally California, Washington, Utah, Texas, Kentucky, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Illinois, Kansas, Georgia, and South Carolina. And they were the ones that really helped us in developing our strategic plan. And it is an innovative and ambitious strategic plan. We also developed a comprehensive study on trauma-informed practices and its relation to social justice and have published that. This grant helped us to develop a new certificate in building trauma-informed practices for higher education, and we'll be offering that this summer for faculty and staff. We also had workshops for our faculty and staff on how to integrate TIP into their classroom and into their student services. And we are beginning on a TIP certificate for criminal justice and for business. I'm really excited about the criminal justice because I believe that if we had more officers trained in trauma-informed practices and how to handle situations than like the ones that cost the life of George Floyd. So we're already in a search for an executive director to be hired soon, actively seeking funding to launch the Institute in July or August. And the campus is committed, the faculty, the staff, and the students understand how important building resilience and through trauma-informed practices. I think this institute is going to have a profound impact on systemic racism, on addressing economic equality and social justice by focusing on the root cause, the cause of trauma in the lives of individuals, and especially in the lives of marginalized people. We hope that we kind of hit the different boxes that Alana talked about: systemic and policy change, training, economic justice, and civic engagement. We are very grateful for that support and look forward for a really bright future for the Institute in building resilience through trauma-informed practices. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so I tasked both of our community partners with a tough task this morning, and that was to be able to give a high level overview of their extremely valuable and impactful programs. And when I say high level, I think we decided on between 5 to 7 minutes. And I appreciate you being able to do that in such an impactful way. You gave a great overview of your program and why it stuck out to us as a company and our leadership as just the perfect example for us of an organization that's doing a great job addressing a root cause of an issue, and then taking it a step further and saying, how can we do something about this? What can we do that plays to our special expertise to start to address this challenge? So really appreciate you taking the time to talk through that with us this morning. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Anna Walker. She is the South Carolina Director of Legal Services for Root and Rebound, to give some information about her program that we recently funded.
Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to be here with you all this morning. So I am going to try to do my best, as Peter just did a wonderful job of putting a lot of information in a tiny space. So Root and Rebound is a legal aid organization. We are a nonprofit. We originated in California about 8 years ago, and they wanted to expand their work into the South. And so we are a criminal justice reform organization to give a high level overview. And in that, we are addressing the criminal justice system as it is commonly known. The system disproportionately affects minorities, people of color, people that are indigent. And so in that, we are very naturally, and unfortunately so, addressing the racial disparities that are commonly occurring every day. So Root and Rebound's mission is a three-pronged approach. We really focus on putting power back into our clients' hands, back into individuals that are system impacted, so that they have the resources and the power to really get over the numerous hurdles. There are thousands of hurdles for an individual experiencing re-entry or suffering the consequences of their criminal record or any system involvement. So we also really let our clients' needs kind of guide exactly where our work is focused and where we need to have address particular needs. So we have a three-pronged approach that includes direct services, education, and policy reform. So in our direct services, we do direct client representation. That includes court representation and addressing various legal matters that really cover the gamut. So our big requirement is that clients have to have their legal issue come out of their system involvement. It has to come from them being incarcerated. It has to come from being charged. It has to come from their criminal record. So that is really our very strict requirement. Other than that, we don't do pending charges. We leave that up to private criminal defense attorneys and the public defender's offices, which are incredible resources and wonderful partners. But we also don't do really like any fee generating cases where somebody, for instance, may sue the Department of Corrections for negligence or something like that. However, we do a really good job about having various partner organizations and other referrals so that we kind of don't leave clients out in the wind and really try to find a resource to address their issue if it's something that we don't particularly handle. We also do education. Through the pandemic and the wonderful invention of Zoom, we've been able to really reach a broader audience. So we've been training community members, social service providers, potential clients, individuals that are system impacted, their friends, family, as well as other lawyers about common issues that are affecting the impacted population. Finally, we do policy reform, and I'm going to kick it over to Alicia here in just a second, who's going to get a little more specifics about some of the work that we are doing at the moment. But that could be administrative or legislative, or even we do impact litigation, which is kind of larger scale change on a higher level. So we were thrilled to really learn about this grant and understand that we were one of the early applicants, and it's we really appreciate being selected and are just really thrilled to be part of this partnership. We found the grant portal to be very user-friendly. It was very easy to navigate. We felt that the application was straightforward. However, it wasn't so restrictive in that it kind of boxed us in as to the terms we needed to discuss. So it really allowed us to talk about our organization on our own terms and how we address issues that our clients are facing. So once we submitted our application, we felt the response was very timely, as both to the interview and the notification that we were awarded the grant. So we felt that the process was very transparent, and the overarching goal of the Social Justice Fund really closely aligns with Root and Rebound's mission. I guess I would have to address the events going on in our nation right now, and with the death of George Floyd, and as much as there's lots to discuss, I do think it's a step forward, and that, but I hope that everyone realizes there's still a lot of work to do, and we are up to the challenge, and we are ready to really make some systems change. So in that, I will turn it over to Alicia Rico Flores, who is our South Carolina Director of Systems Change, to tell us a little more about some of our policy work.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Alana, for having us, and thank you for your support. We greatly appreciate it. So what I'm going to do is just briefly give you an overview of Root and Rebound's current policy and legislative reform agenda. One issue that is near and dear to us is child support reform. Half of the incarcerated population has a child support matter. And while you are incarcerated, you're considered voluntarily unemployed. And this places a tremendous burden on returning citizens, a tremendous financial burden on the citizen and their families. And so Root and Rebound has drafted legislation that we hope will become law, where an individual who is incarcerated will have the benefit of an automated child support modification order. And so if the person who is obligated to pay child support is within the South Carolina Department of Corrections, the Child Support Services Division would automatically prepare a proposed order reducing the support obligation to $0. Now, there would be some exceptions to that particular legislation. One would be if the person incarcerated committed an offense against the custodial parent or the child named in the support order. Another thing that we would like the court to do is to consider factors which are that may cause the court to deviate from the child support guidelines, factors like educational expenses, debt, as well as agreements that may be entered into between the actual parties, between the person who was formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated as well, and the other parent. So another issue that we are pursuing is the SNAP ban. And I believe I'm correct in saying that South Carolina is the lone state with a full ban still currently on SNAP benefits for those who have felony drug convictions. And SNAP is another word for food stamps, supplemental nutritional assistance program. And once again, this creates a tremendous burden on those who are poor and are trying to re-enter society and get, some type of, food benefits. We're currently strategizing with Appleseed to address the ban, and hopefully we will make some progress on that in the very near future. Another issue on our agenda is voting. We want those who have been formerly incarcerated, but yet still are under administrative monitoring, which means that the only form of monitoring is monitoring of a fee or fine, a financial obligation that is still owed. So we would like individuals who are eligible to vote, who have completed their probation, who have completed their parole, but yet still have a financial obligation. We want them to be aware and to receive verification in writing of their eligibility to vote. And so that is something we're currently working with the South Carolina Department of Probation, Pardon, and Parole to make sure that that particular issue is carried forth and implemented. And finally, a very big issue is the parole reform for juvenile lifers. When a juvenile is sentenced to life with the possibility of parole in South Carolina, they become eligible. When they become eligible for parole, they have to appear before the parole board. And the parole board does not necessarily have to consider the juvenile factors that may have led to the commission of a particular crime. So we would like to see non-arbitrary decisions from the parole board regarding paroling an individual who committed a crime while they were a juvenile. We'd like to see more of a specific set of guidelines be followed when making those decisions so that they are more uniform and they're less arbitrary. And I think, you know, we in our particular organization, we can't, you know, not discuss systemic racism, because in all of the issues, all of the things that we want to accomplish on our policy and legislative agenda disproportionately affect people of color. And so this is why I do what I do. We're about justice and equality. And our mission is to continue empowering individuals who are re-entering society, those who have been formerly incarcerated, through our particular legislative and policy agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time that you both took to walk through your amazing program. Another fun fact about Root and Rebound, when I presented their application to our advisory committee, they get the applications about a week in advance, so they have time to read through the application and familiarize themselves with the organization before we meet and discuss it. And when they reviewed Root and Rebound's application, it was a unanimous vote to yes, yes, yes. We love what they're doing. We didn't know this organization existed in our community. We want to partner with them. So not all applications are reviewed that easily. Root and Rebound and Columbia College were two that our advisory committee I just felt so strongly about. So appreciate all of you coming and sharing what you're doing in our community with everyone today. And with that, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about one, the expansion of our fund, of our social justice fund, and then our two other grant programs that are available. So the social justice fund, as I mentioned before, had a very narrow focus in 2020 of racial justice programming only. That has not changed in 2021. That is still a primary focus of the fund. As Anna mentioned, and I think it's so important to call this out, especially after yesterday. You know, after the verdict yesterday, the word that resounded in my head was accountability, accountability. That I think is the key word to hold on to here. I saw a lot of justice has been served posts on social media, and I get that too, but what I really hope that everyone remembers is that there's still so much work to do. So I want to highlight, just really emphasize that racial justice is still so important to our company. However, we have broadened the perimeters of the Social Justice Fund to include programming that is addressing discrimination and bias to other groups of people outside of racial justice that could experience that. So we're actively seeking applications that offer programming to our LGBTQ folks, to that community, to individuals with disabilities, to veterans, to women. As you might remember, I talked about our internal employee resource groups. The intention of the fund when it was created was to eventually grow it to the point that it can fund programming that touches on all 5 of our internal employee resource groups. So in full transparency, I haven't had a lot of applications come in that really touch on those other 4 areas yet. And I think it's really just because maybe most people don't realize that that's available, which is why I'm so appreciative of the forum I have here today to get the word out. Another interesting thing of note to us as a company is after we did our webinar with Together SC last year, pretty much all of our grant applications came in as a result of that webinar. Maybe not from the specific individuals that have attended, but the word traveled within your networks to help connect me to organizations doing this work. And so my hope is after this call today, that will turn out to be the same, and that we will see an increase in applications for racial justice, but also for programming that speaks specifically to those other 4 groups: LGBTQ community, individuals with disabilities, women, and our veterans. So I'd love, if you have questions, would love to follow up with you if you want to learn more about what that could look like. But that's a big focus for our company moving forward. And then, as you see on your screen, we have two other grant opportunities that are available and live on our external website. If you're familiar with Colonial Life or have received a grant from us in the past, you may remember that we had 3 pillars of giving: education, health and well-being, and arts and culture. In 2020, we went through a corporate social responsibility refresh. I'm not going to call it an overhaul because some of the things that we continue to do have remained the same. But what we knew as a team that we wanted to do is to really refine our focus areas. If you can imagine a focus area of education, health and well-being, and arts and culture, that's very broad. There's a lot of things that can fall within those categories. So we wanted to be a little bit more intentional about the types of programs we were actively looking for. The first that you see is equitable pathways. This kind of takes the place in a way of our education pillar. Equitable pathways has a specific focus of workforce development. So really that 8th grade and above, all the way through college student that may be a minority or come from a disadvantaged community, making sure that they have the tools that they need to enter into post-secondary education, trade school, whatever track they want to take, making sure that they have the tools that they need to be able to do it and do it successfully. Of course, by doing that, that creates a healthier community, and that plays nicely into our second focus area of healthier communities. This lends itself to Colonial Life's business. You know, we're an insurance company, so obviously health and well-being is important to us, and it's important to our company. When we dove into research to try to determine really what did we want the focus of this to be, we did a lot of research, and I don't think what I'm about to say will be a surprise to anyone. The resounding need in communities, not just local to South Carolina, but nationwide, is mental health. It's a crisis in our country. We all know that. And so this is why we've made that a focus for our Healthier Communities grant track, actively looking for programming in our community that's specifically addressing the mental health crisis in our community. And then secondary to that, not any less important, but a second focus to Healthier Communities is increasing basic access to healthcare. So making sure that communities local to us have, if they're a disadvantaged community, if they're at or below the poverty line, making sure that they have access to basic health care, just like any other community should have. So those are our other 2 grant making programs. I think some of you on this call, I think, are aware of these programs, and we've spoken about them already. But this next slide really details our preferred way for you to apply. I think at the beginning it was mentioned that I come from nonprofit. That's true. This is really my first job working in corporate America. And one of the things about this particular company that appealed to me when I made the decision to leave the nonprofit world and enter over to the corporate side of things was the way that they approach grant making. I love to talk to you before you submit your grant application, because I don't get an accurate overview of all of the great work you all do in your community without that initial conversation. It's really hard to gauge your impact and know all of the things that you're doing just by reading a grant application and making a decision whether or not we should fund it without talking to you first. Ideally, we talk before you submit your grant application so I can learn all about the programs that you offer, and then we can determine together if we have alignment. And then that way, as the community partner, you know, when you submit your grant application, that we've talked first and you've submitted a grant application that really fits our criteria. My email address is on the screen. Would love to hear from you, and we can schedule some time to connect if you feel like your program might have some alignment in these different focus areas. Another thing that I think is helpful is for you to go take a peek at our applications. Some of our community partners today mentioned how accessible they are. They're on our external website, which we can provide the link to that. You can click into any of those applications and see the questions and get kind of an idea of what we're looking for when you're applying. And then from there, again, would love to talk to you first before you submit your application. With that, I'm going to stop talking because I know that we have thrown a lot of information at all of you and would love to know if anyone has any questions, not just for me, but for either of our community partners on the call as well.
Alana, thank you. This has been a wonderful overview of your program, and thank you to Root and Rebound and to Columbia College. I'm seeing a few questions come in. One is one from Karen, and you had just talked a little bit about equitable pathways, and that's a workforce development focused area. Is it true that you need to focus on programs over 8th grade? Is that what you're looking for, or is that?
I think it really would depend on the program. The focus of equitable pathways is, of course, workforce development. And sometimes it's tough to find a program like that in the elementary school space. But of course, that's not me saying it doesn't exist. So if it's a program that's dealing with a younger age, elementary school age children, we'd love to hear about it, and we can determine if there's some alignment there.
Hopefully that answers your question, Karen. There's several here about deadlines, and I know you and I spoke about this, I think, in our planning call, but this is sort of a rolling process, correct?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's another thing that I like about our grant making programs. We don't have a deadline for applications to be submitted. We do have a cadence for review, and the cadence is different for the Social Justice Fund and then Equitable Pathways and Healthier Communities. So with the Social Justice Fund, I shared earlier, we review those right now monthly, and funding decisions are communicated to partners really every 2 months. For Healthier Communities and Equitable Pathways, we review those quarterly. So we just finished our first quarter review cycle and have communicated funding decisions. Our next grant review cycle will be at the end of the second quarter, with decisions communicated in July. Now, as we get through the third quarter and enter into the fourth quarter of the year, just like most organizations, we're kind of starting to wrap up and should already have an idea of where we are budget-wise. So while we don't have a deadline, it's still really good for our community partners to touch base and submit really before that fourth quarter.
And another sort of technical question, are you offering grants throughout South Carolina? Is it the entire state, or is it regional? Where are these grant opportunities open?
That's another great question. The Social Justice Fund is open statewide, so throughout the state of South Carolina. And it's not just isolated there. Our company, Unum, has locations all over the country. So we have locations in Tennessee and Massachusetts, in Maine, in Louisiana, and we also have field offices nationwide. So the Social Justice Fund community partners that we spoke with today were local to South Carolina, but our Social Justice Fund is available actually nationwide. And then here in South Carolina, of course, that would mean statewide. For Equitable Pathways and Healthier Communities, typically those programs would be local to the Midlands area, but we place a special emphasis on reaching communities that are at or below the poverty line. And those communities aren't just in the Midlands area. So if there is a program that your organization wants to offer within a disadvantaged community that really needs some help, and maybe they're outside of the Midlands area, we want to talk about that.
Great. And of course, how much are the range of your grants? What size are these grants?
Yeah, that's another one that's really good, a good question to ask, and it varies based on the program. So the Social Justice Fund, the grant range amount hasn't changed since last year. So it's a minimum of $2,500, a maximum of $10,000. We don't necessarily advise you on how much to ask for that program. I encourage in organizations to ask for what they need. And that's worked very well over the past 10 months or so. So that would be my guidance there. For Equitable Pathways and Healthier Communities, we don't necessarily have a cap on those two programs. If it is a new community partner, just the way our company tends to enter into relationships with new partners, is we like to start kind of small in the lower range, just so we can see how the partnership goes for that year, and then that organization would be eligible to apply again the following year. And then if the partnership works well for us both, then they're certainly invited to increase their ask. So for equitable pathways and healthier communities, there's no cap, and what you would ask for would really depend on your program and what your need is, which I think is why that initial conversation between the two of us is so important, so we can talk through that.
So what I'm hearing you say is that organizations, if they've already received funding, can apply again?
That's true for both grant programs. So we ask that organizations apply once annually. So if you've applied for a social justice fund money and you've received a grant, you're eligible to apply 12 months after that time. And the same is true for our equitable pathways and healthier communities. We ask for one submission per calendar year, and then you're of course invited to apply again after that for the same program, or if there's something different that you'd like to talk to us about for the second year, that's also fine with us.
And so I guess on the other side of it, if you're declined for a grant, what do you recommend coming back with after maybe working with you and developing a relationship, or what do you recommend for those that may have already applied and were not successful in securing funds?
Yeah, so our guideline is still what we ask organizations to follow, is to apply once per calendar year. But I'm going to put a caveat there that I try really hard to work with an organization on why there might be a decline, and then we try very hard to be flexible. So if there is a situation where an organization is declined, but maybe there's a way for them to adjust their application or apply for something different, that's something we can talk about. That's another thing I really like from someone that comes from nonprofit with our company, is we're not black and white when it comes to our grant making programs. We want to have continued conversations with you so that we both know what the other is planning to do, and we want to have some built-in flexibility there. So I would say try to adhere to that 12-month time frame, but at the same time understand that it would be great for us to talk about it and see if there are other options within your organization that we could align with. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I hope it did.
I think that was helpful. And here's a question, so maybe a sort of an evergreen question in grant making, but do you fund specific projects, or would you consider general operations if the scope of the work is in social justice?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so if you were to look at our giving portfolio of all of the different programs that we've funded, what you would see is that our preference is very programmatic in nature. So typically, if we are funding a nonprofit organization within equitable pathways or healthier communities, we're funding a specific program. And when we're looking at funds and saying, are they restricted or unrestricted? For the most part, within equitable pathways and healthier communities, they'd be restricted to a specific program. Not in every case, it really depends on the organization and what they're doing. For the social justice fund, I think Root and Rebound is a great example of our funding for that program. It's for really general expenses because everything that they do meets the criteria for the social justice fund. So we didn't enter into that relationship restricting that grant to one component of their work, because so much of it really fits the criteria of what we're looking to fund.
Thank you. And somewhat related from Darlene, will you fund personnel or core mission support?
Did you say for personnel? So like salary, that kind of thing? So I think it just depends on the grant and how it's written. So we know, and of course I know from someone that comes from nonprofit, people don't work for free. You have to be paid to do your job, and the success of your organization depends on the people that are there to do the work, and they can't do it for free, and we know that. So while I would advise you against submitting a grant for someone's salary, we also know that if you're submitting a grant that requires someone's salary, a good practice is to incorporate that into your budget template that you would upload with your grant, and to write the grant for the program that it is or for the mission of the organization. So I'll use Root and Rebound again. They wrote their grant specific to their mission. So they touched on every aspect of their mission within their grant application. And that was great because we were able to see that and then take that budget spreadsheet that they uploaded that did show salary and it really see the importance of how they both work together. But I would not encourage you to submit a grant application specifically for someone's salary. It sort of needs to be part of the big picture.
That's really helpful how you framed it. And hopefully, Darlene, that's helpful for you.
You went on mute.
Sorry, can you hear the noise outside my house?
No.
Okay, there's a tree getting cut down right there.
Of course, right now.
Yeah, I'd like to know a little more about your employees, committees. You said you get them together. Tell us a little bit about how organizations can give them information that they're most interested in. I mean, how do organizations even engage with those employees? Is that appropriate? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so I like to be a good steward of your time. I know that nonprofit organizations are doing a lot of work with few. You have to wear a lot of hats. So I would never ask you as the organization to engage directly with our advisory committee for our social justice fund, because again, these individuals on these advisory committees, they don't work in nonprofit. And they don't even really work in corporate social responsibility. They work for an insurance company. So there are things that they may ask you that I can just answer for them so that they don't spend a lot of your time having to do that. That's why, I know I keep saying this, I feel like I'm being redundant, but I want to make sure everyone understands. That's why it's so important for us to talk. I do not present any applications to the advisory committee if I haven't met with you first, because I want to understand everything there is to know about your program, everything that I can know, so that when I talk to them, I can field those questions. However, there are situations where I can't answer the question. In that situation, I don't connect 5 individuals with you and then expect you to navigate through email traffic to try to answer their questions. I act as that guide, as that liaison for the relationship, so that I can take their questions, package it up in a concise way in one email or one conversation, so that you can answer it in the best way possible. And so there's really not a lot of opportunity for you to engage directly with the advisory committee. However, when we meet, I'm going to ask you if there's anything outside of just what you submit on the grant application that you'd like me to include in the packet that they review. Some organizations send me testimonials and photos and an impact report that they want included to make sure that the advisory committee gets to see that. And I am happy to include anything from your organization within that packet that they review outside of the grant application. That's worked really well over the last 10 months. There's been supplemental information organizations have supplied that has really helped make the decision for the advisory committee outside of the grant application. So that's always an option.
Great, that's very helpful. I guess this will be the last question, but you obviously introduced 2 really outstanding organizations that are great examples of what you're looking for. But do you convene all of your grantees in any way, or how do you, I know you keep in touch with them individually, but have you done any sort of convening best practices?
You know, we haven't, and I think that's an awesome suggestion, because I know for this call, Peter and Anna and Alicia were able to connect with each other, and I don't think maybe they even necessarily knew about each other's program in the community, and I think that gives great opportunity for them to potentially stay connected as they move through their year with their program. And I think that is probably not something that would have happened had it not been for this call today. And so I think that's a great call out, and something our team, not just here locally in South Carolina, but our broader CSR team, needs to probably keep in mind, that connecting, especially I think with the Social Justice Fund, connecting these organizations together to learn about each other's program plays into collaboration, which is actually a question on our grant application. We want to see that organizations are collaborating with each other. And Anna mentioned this when she talked about Root and Rebound, that they never want to be a stop sign for an individual, that, okay, if we can't help you, sorry, good luck. It's connecting them to other organizations that can. And you can't do that if you don't network. And so I think it would be a great opportunity for organizations to connect with each other, especially in the realm of social justice, because it's so important right now.
Well, that I think is such a great way to conclude. You know, one of the things I've just appreciated so much of working with you and even through today's session is you really are a partner in this work with your grant recipients, and you're so accessible. You know, that's not always the case in these types of dynamics and relationships between funders and fundees, but I genuinely see that you are trying to build those community and individual relationships, and we really appreciate that. And you're learning as you go through this process too. And I love how you've adapted based on what you've seen and heard from your recipients. So I think that's amazing. So I do want to point out that Peter did put in the chat box a link to their program, Institute for Building Resilience Through Trauma-Informed Practices, something that I think all nonprofits could benefit from learning more about. And we appreciate Peter and the information that you presented today, and of course what we heard from Root and Rebound too. I didn't know awareness of all the things that they are doing in our community. So thank you for highlighting those two organizations and their work, Alana. This is fantastic. Well, I don't know, we might be inviting you back again for another update of where things are going, but you certainly presented in a way that I see many of our members being online, so that I think we will get the word out. I already made notes of some of the new focus areas and organizations I don't see on the line today that I am going to reach out to ask them to see what you're doing in these fields, disabilities and women's work and the LGBTQ community and so forth. So, you know, I know I'm going to be reaching out. So hopefully if it didn't apply to your organization today, that you will take those steps and reach out to other organizations in your community that may benefit from these wonderful grant funds that Unum Colonial Life is offering. And thank you so much for this partnership, Alana. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us. Really.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, we do have we always have upcoming programs, but a few that folks online might be interested in. Next week, going back into our COVID discussions on vaccination on February, well, I lost a few months here, April 27th, next week from 10 to 11:30 on the 27th, we are going to have a session on the strategies to increase vaccination rates among African Americans. This is a partnership that we're doing with the State Hospital Association and some faith-based community leaders to really talk about how to address issues of vaccination fears and so forth, and how to reach other communities that are not getting vaccinated. So that's on April 27th. On April 28th, the very next day, we will be talking about the ARP, the American Rescue Plan, with some experience about that and how this applies to your organization. So another great opportunity for Together SC to learn about what's going on here in response to what's been going on in our country for the last year. So with that, it's 10 o'clock. Appreciate everyone's time today, and we look forward to seeing you on a future call very soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentations. I'm so glad to learn about your work.